Daniel Olson, this video's for you. A viewer, Daniel Olson, asked me about my table saw fence, the one that I built. And he was wondering how I built it. I'm assuming he wants to build one of his own. So, this video is going to answer those questions. Now, being in Canada, we have a combination of metric and standard things on here. So, the main beam of the fence is an aluminium extrusion, and it's 44 millimeters by 88, which is 3.5 by 1 3/4. I keep it on the flat. I like my fence low. Now, even if you're cutting a piece 1/4 inch thicker than that, it still supports it fine along the edge. So I like a low fence where I feel safer than a high tall fence you have to reach over. One thing is that it's got these holes in it that can be tapped, which is vital. So the business end of the fence, on the other end of the aluminium extrusion, is just a piece of 1/2 inch plywood cut to size, and under here you see it's bolted into those right here. It's bolted in to the aluminum extrusion, and then a plain ordinary toggle clamp for the locking mechanism and a little gusset, and it's only attached to the plywood because the force is this way, so that gusset stops it from bending. So, and that is just a plain ordinary toggle clamp. Now the T section is just angle iron, and it is 1.5 inch angle iron, which is 38 millimeters or so. So 38 by 38 by, what is it, 1/8 inch, I think. 3/16 angle iron. Uh, 7 or 8 millimeters thick. And into that, on each side, I drilled and tapped a hole here and here. Inside of those, on each side, front and top, I bought a nylon grub screw. And they are 3/8 16. 3/8 by 16 nylon grub screws. I don't know how that helps you. What's 3/8 in metric? About a 5 or a 6 mil? 6 mil would probably do it. They're about 7 mil. About a 6 or an 8 millimeter grub screw. And along with those, I have got, these are little nylon or metal spring nuts for the same thing. And they're just like little flat pieces. And they've got little teeth in them, and they thread on. And you can see them here, and they act like a lock washer or a lock nut. So this is threaded, it goes in, and then the lock nut holds that in place. And what that does is my grub screws will go make it vertical, and it'll also adjust my fence this way so I can get it parallel to the saw blade. The piece of angle iron itself is about 340 millimeters. about 13 3/8 inches from here to here. Get you in there. So that's the length. And that might be a little long. If I was to rebuild it now, I'd probably make it only about 10 inches or 255 millimeters. And maybe even go shorter than that. Maybe as short as 210 millimeters you could get away with. So if I turn this upside down, the angle iron is bolted on to the extrusion. And just a second. For extrusion, you can get these little slip nuts. You can see it's got that goes to the bottom, and they slip into the extrusion like so. So you have a nut in there. So it just slides like a T-track. So those are 5 or 6 millimeter bolts into those nuts, and it goes through another little piece of aluminium. And that little piece of aluminium was the piece I had to have machined. So if we can get a really good shot of that, you can see the aluminium here, and it goes down over the edge. So it's got like a little lip that comes over the front of the angle iron. And the other thing it has, and I'll zoom you in here, is it also has a little lip that registers into the extrusion. I don't think that's very critical, but it just helps lock this extrusion parallel, or no, it helps lock this and keep it 90 degrees. And I am out by that little piece of paper right there. That's how far out I was. So all I had is it all machined away except for that little lip, and these machined exactly perpendicular on the other side. So that keys into the extrusion, and that keys to the front of the angle iron. Now, for the rail on the fence, the part that attaches to the table saw, I just took a big piece of angle iron, and it is 2 inch by 2 inch, or 50 millimeter by 50 millimeter. 5 millimeters thick, 3/16 thick, and that gets bolted right to the table saw. And I use stock mounting locations where there were, and I just put countersunk and put the bolts through it, and then bolted it nuts on the other side, on the back side. For the part that goes into the wood, I just use wood screws countersunk in. And from above you can actually see 6 millimeter bolts that I put through there. 6 millimeter machine screws. They're actually protruding a little bit, and I do actually get a little bit of interference with it, but my fence does push through it. The little nylon grub screws touch it. And over here you can see where the wood screws go into the wooden part. So just a piece of angle iron, regular old angle iron. And the other part of the fence is just square tubing, and that is 1.5 inches. So that's 2 inches, that's 1.5 inches, by 1.5" square tubing, which is what in metric? About 38 millimeters. And as you can see, I got dust in there, but there's a gap in there for the edge of the fence to drop down over. So that's what it rides on. To mount the square tubing to the angle iron, I just drilled and tapped holes in there and bolted it through. And there's a couple of washers to space it up to get me my right height. It gives me a little gap underneath there. So this is the angle iron, and this is a square tubing, a 5mm bolt, a couple of washers for a spacer, and then the square tubing. One other thing I did on the top of the tubing was I applied what they call Teflon tape or slippery tape. I put it on this edge, and I don't really think it's necessary. It's chewed up in spots, but it just helps the fence slide across a little bit better. It rides on those nylon grub screws. And then the toggle clamp just clamps onto the square tubing. So those toggle clamps are adjustable. And it's stable. It's never moved on me in all the years I've had it. So here's that bolt. And you can see the, maybe you can't see. Hard to get an angle on that. There we go. You can see the grub screw just kind of, but it does go by. So as I said, these top bolts and these side bolts, make sure everything goes nice and square. And there are times when I'm resawing wood that I actually do need a taller fence. And what I've got for that is just a piece of wood, and it's got those same bolts and those same captured nuts on it. And they just slide in. And I keep a wrench right in my table saw. And there, I've got a tall fence on there. You can make that out of just about anything you wanted. I had ash, so that's what I did. And I also use it for a sacrificial fence for making dados. You can see it's been wiped out a little bit there, but you know, put another piece of wood on, drill some more holes. As long as they're not coming up where the saw blade is coming up, you're fine. So they don't even have to be accurate because they slide. That's my tall fence, and that's why I wanted to make sure these grub screws, I could adjust it so it would be perpendicular to the table this way. So if I'm doing resawing, I can get a nice square cut to the edge of the table. This is a nice 90-degree corner right here. So that, in a nutshell, is my homemade table saw fence. And it was done without really much metal work at all. You need a drill, a tap, a way to cut your iron, and optional is that little piece of aluminium to register everything. And that's about it. And every time I check it, it's bang on. The aluminum extrusion I had, I got for free. It was actually about that much longer, but I cut it off to a shorter. Just seems to work better. But whatever you need, stores there under my table saw. My old table saw cart goes away. And that's it. Okay, Daniel, I hope that answers all of your questions. If you have any more, just give me a holler. Oh, the saw. The saw is a 1986 Craftsman contractor saw built onto this cart, which is a little bit larger than it has to be. But it holds everything table saw related on the cart. It needs to be replaced. It won't heal over to 45 degree anymore. Probably needs more work than it's worth putting into it. But it was my dad's. 1986, that's 24 years old. It still cuts wood just fine. Direct drive. The blades go right onto the shaft of the motor. No sense in me looking at replacing it until I get the electricity in the shop done up, and then I'll start looking at new table saws. I'm looking for a cabinet saw. I thought about cutting this one down, cutting it off here, making a bit shorter, and making a router table to go into it. And do I want to put that much time and effort into something that has to be replaced? I don't know. But when I do get rid of the saw, I'll probably keep the motor for something else. Just because it's my dad's, you know? Or was my dad's. So thanks for your question, Daniel. I hope that answers everything. Like I said, just leave a comment if you have any more questions about it. Thanks for dropping by, and thanks for your questions. Everybody stay safe out there. Be nice to each other.